One of the things that's evolved in terms of the business, I think there is increasingly a values-driven customer. I mean, they're coming to us looking for fashion, they're coming looking for beautiful product, but they also really want to understand the brands they're buying into and what is their impact from an environmental perspective. What are the values behind these brands?
Hello and welcome to The Big Interview. Our guest this week is widely considered to be one of the most influential figures in fashion and retail, the interim CEO and president of the Yoox Net-a-Porter Group, Alison Loehnis. Prior to joining Net-a-Porter in 2007, Loehnis spent time in the advertising and marketing departments of companies as varied as Saatchi & Saatchi, Hachette, Disney, and LVMH, combining a deep understanding of creativity and business. She joined Net-a-Porter in its infancy, when many luxury brands were still not convinced about selling online. Since then, she has helped build the Net-a-Porter Group, launching menswear site Mr. Porter and online outlet The Outnet. She has overseen the company's merger with Yoox, a public listing and delisting on the Milan Stock Exchange, as well as an acquisition by Swiss luxury group Richemont. Now, once again, she's steering the business into a new chapter as Richemont looks to sell. The landscape might have changed, online sales might be slowing down across the board, yet Loehnis is confident that Net-a-Porter will remain a market leader. We look back at the business's journey so far and talk about the founding values, from curation to customer service, that remain essential today. I'm Natalie Theodosi, and I spoke to Alison Loehnis on The Big Interview. I wanted to start by rewinding a little bit and talking about sort of all your journey, because you had such diverse experiences from Disney to Saatchi & Saatchi. And can you tell us a little bit more about that and how they shaped you and your understanding of creativity and luxury?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I also would say it's a bit of a full circle moment, because when I first moved to London 23 years ago, I lived around the corner.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I had no idea what Marylebone was. And I will be lying if I said I pronounced it correctly. And I had a map on my kitchen table where I would circle where I was going to live to try and figure it out. So anyways, it's a homecoming.
So you're back home.
I'm back home. I always love this neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's changed so much in such a great way. I have always been a very visual person and very sort of sensitive to sort of product and surroundings, visual. And I studied history of art at school, at university, and loved it. Was very, I guess you describe it these days, I was very sort of present during those years and really focused on having a fantastic time and learning and being spongy, and was not particularly career focused. When the time came to graduate and get a job, all I knew is I wanted something creative and something in business. And my mother had worked in advertising, and I had spent a lot of time visiting her in the office. And to me, that, as a industry, it seemed, or as a career choice, that seemed like a sort of perfect option, because essentially you're using something creative to bring a product to life and to sell it. So that's really how I was lucky enough to get this job at Saatchi. From Saatchi, I went on to work in magazine publishing for Hachette Philippaki. I then joined Disney. I then joined a digital agency that got me to London, and then LVMH, and then what was then just Net-a-Porter, because we were just the one brand. And throughout my career, I've had sales jobs, sales and marketing. And though, at a high level, you would look and say, well, gosh, they're different industries, different things. The sort of red thread, if you will, really has been around bringing product to life. And how do you attract a consumer and get them excited about your product through images, through storytelling? And how do you make sure the service around that becomes super appealing? And it's really around understanding the customer.
Absolutely. And it does sound like you didn't follow one linear path. Decisions that you took were quite instinctual, and especially looking at the transition of going from LVMH, from a conglomerate, and from working for a lot of household names, to, at the time, a very small startup. Like you said, it was just Net-a-Porter, and at the time the idea of buying a luxury product online was very novel, right? And a lot of people laughed at it. So what made you believe in the pitch for the company and for you to leave something that felt a lot more secure, I'm sure, and then take the leap and go into an entrepreneurial startup environment?
When the opportunity presented itself, I didn't feel any risk in that sense. I mean, of course, there's always risk joining a new company or making a change. There's inherently risk involved. But, back then, it didn't even feel like a startup. It's with hindsight that you realize, oh my gosh, we were like 100 people or whatever we were, and, so small. But it felt to me, I mean, I remember when I heard about the launch of Net-a-Porter, and I was working in New York for this digital agency, and there was this online sort of newsletter called Daily Candy that was super successful. And Daily Candy, which I loved, and I used to look forward to it hitting my inbox. And I remember it announcing this business called Net-a-Porter. And I don't think I've ever been so excited. I mean, I remember thinking, this is perfect. Oh my gosh, I love fashion. You're short on time, this idea of this thing coming to you. So I guess I've been a believer since the beginning. And so for me, it felt like jumping into the future rather than jumping into a kind of risky pond, if you will.
And 17 years later, I mean, you started looking after sales and marketing for Net-a-Porter. Now your role is group-wide, you're leading the business. Tell me, how has it's a big question, but what are the biggest kind of shifts and changes that you've had to steer the team through? And how has everything evolved over those years since that day that you decided to join the team and build the business from the ground up?
So there's been a lot of evolution. I think I would start with what stayed the same, which is really the entrepreneurial spirit that drives the company, the collective passion for the customer and wanting the best for our customer, trying to stay a few steps ahead, anticipating their needs, a real love of product, which is palpable. And also, I think the culture that pervades the company, no matter which brand you work on. This sense of collegiality, everyone works really hard, has a good time doing it, and just the relationships that are formed. And I remember when I first joined being struck by, I think it must have been after either a Christmas holiday or summer, and people were returning to the office after a little bit of time out and hugging each other. But genuinely, people being excited to see each other. And I had never really experienced it to that degree. And again, it's that real sense of just team and your work family. Okay, so that's been, those are some of the things that have remained consistent over the years. I think in terms of the company, I joined a brand. We then launched the Outnet. We launched Mr. Porter. We merged with Yoox. Prior to the merger with Yoox, we were a group. We were, still in startup mode. Then we became, after the merger with Yoox, a listed business. So from a kind of, architectural standpoint or ownership standpoint, there was a lot of evolution. I think, though, if you look at this space and you take a macro perspective in terms of the consumer, so much has changed. In the early days of being in the business, I remember, thinking about life beyond the desktop. It was super exciting. And I remember, we were one of the first businesses, if not the first sort of luxury fashion player to develop a transactional app. And the idea behind our very first app, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, was in 2009, came off the back of customer demand or a sort of a customer concern. And we used to get these women at that point writing in and saying, I love what's new. I love when you've got new product, but I just hate missing out when I'm not at my desk. And at that point, mobile was very much a sort of nascent platform in terms of e-com. And we thought, well, actually, how can we put the two things together? So our very first app was what's new. So there was this idea that you didn't have to be at your desk. And that seemed like super, super disruptive. So I would say, technology and the way in which people are discovering product, discovering brands. If you look at social media as a really interesting way of not just developing a dialogue with a brand or a retailer, but also discovering newness and getting styling inspiration. I think moving on to the next chapter, what AI will be able to further unlock in terms of personalization, anticipation of customer needs, solving problems like size and fit and what have you. So really, I think technology has been the biggest game changer. And then I think alongside that, customer expectation. And one of the things I've been a really firm believer in is that, you need to really think about the customer and what are they experiencing with other businesses, even outside of your sector. So if you look at what Amazon did in the early days, was really set a customer expectation with Prime that you can get stuff super quickly. Okay. And even though what we're selling, for example, is quite different to what Amazon's selling versus, let's say, grocery or what have you, the customer just gets used to getting things on their own terms. And that became really important, just to recognize, just don't look just inside your bubble, but look at what the consumer's looking for overall. And it's really that on your own terms piece. And, when we introduced very early on a same-day service, which started in London, what we started to see in recent years, it was less about, okay, I want it today, which of course still exists. And we do that in Milan, and we do it in London, and we do it in New York, and we do it in Hong Kong. But we started to get customers who would ask for, okay, can I get same day delivery tomorrow? And what that said was actually, it was clearly tomorrow isn't the same day, but it was, I want it. Can you tell me, can I get it exactly where I want it, when I want it, on my terms to make it easy for me?
So it's keeping up with technology, keeping up with the changes in society, but in many ways also listening to customers and setting your own trends and leading the way. Has it been harder in some ways to stay a market leader at a time when people are no longer laughing at the idea of shopping online, but everyone has jumped on the bandwagon, everyone has a website, everyone has an e-commerce site to their business, whether you are a startup, a big department store?
I'd say, listen, it's never been easy, right? So it wasn't easy convincing brands or convincing certain industries that this was a viable opportunity for them. So I'd say that with other players in the market, in some ways it makes it easier. I think it's really important to know what's going on around you, but I'm also a very firm believer in just focus. Let's focus, be aware, know what's coming out, know who's next to you, who's running alongside you in the race or in the competition, but then just focus and really stay true to what you're about and what you're here to do.
And if we go back to your role specifically, you did start at a time when you were focused on the marketing and sales, and it was a smaller team. But I wonder if there is still that opportunity to balance that creativity and with the business and the customer expectations in this bigger role of leading the group, or how has the responsibility and the role evolved in the last few years?
The short answer to, am I able to achieve that equilibrium, that sought after equilibrium between creativity and business? Absolutely. And I think that can come down to, at the most base level or basic level, creative problem solving. But also at the end of the day, we're selling product, beautiful product. If the question is, in leading the organization, does it remove me from the things that originally drew me to the organization? The answer is no, not at all. Removes me it removes me certainly from a lot of the detail that I was once, but I think we've always been a global business. We've become increasingly localized in our biggest markets, that's definitely a change. The technology I spoke to, our ability to be nimble, responding to new trends, new customer or anticipating customer demand. We also, I think, have become increasingly focused. I think when you're, I, like a number of people, definitely can suffer from magpie syndrome, which is, really gravitating towards the shiny and the new and getting really excited about all things shiny and new, which remain exciting. And frankly, fashion is quite often about the shiny and new, but really understanding what's right for us, what's right for our customer. And that brings me back also to that point around technology, and there have been platforms and opportunities that have come up that we've decided to sit out. It was probably tempting to say, oh, actually, that would be really great to experiment with, but we knew that it wasn't necessarily core to what we were offering or something that our customer that was going to make their lives any easier. There were a few things that came out in the social media sort of landscape, which seemed exciting. And there are some players that don't those are players that don't exist anymore. And I remember sort of everyone jumping on the bandwagon and us thinking, well, maybe this could be cool for us, but actually I don't really see how it fits in. And I think that, I have a bit of an allergy to gimmicks. And I think the second you fall prey to a gimmick, but you don't sort of broadcast it as such, in a way, it feels like you're duping your customer. And it's just not the right thing for us.
It does sound like part of your secret sauce is this focus and also developing relationships with the designers, with your customers, and also the designers and the partners of the business. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, because I do know that now, as we said, the landscape has gotten so much more saturated. You have to compete, right? To earn the relationships with the brands, to have exclusivities, all of that. So I know you have great relationships both personally and so does Net-a-Porter as a business. So how do you nurture that, and how do you go about convincing the brands that they need to come to you and not to someone else?
One, we take our relationships very, very seriously. And I've always wanted, or we've always wanted, to be the best partner. Now, best, of course, is, super subjective. But what we really mean by that is, what do we bring you as a brand? What are we bringing you that's valuable to you? And then you, brand, to our customer, why are they going to fall in love with you? Why are we falling in love with you? And why do we think that you're relevant? But I think coming back to that word partner, we see ourselves much more than just a retailer. Yes, okay, we buy your product, that's great, and it's good for business, for you, great, and we sell it and everyone's happy. But it's more than that. We really see ourselves as a marketing partner and a positioning partner, and that can work in a number of ways. So I think it's most obvious if you think about a new brand, okay, because we have this platform that is attracting a global audience. So we discover your brand, you're filling this amazing gap in the market. We love what you're doing. We've never seen anything like what you're doing. We know our customer's going to fall in love with it. Menswear, women's wear, what have you. Great. So before you know it, you've gone from the, perhaps a small country or a small town where you're doing your business to then having this global audience. Okay, that makes sense. But equally, for established players, if you're a big luxury brand, we're exposing you to a different audience and to a new customer. But I think also the way in which we bring product to life through content, and everyone now talks about content. It's really been part of what we do since the beginning. And again, not as a gimmick, not as an add-on, but really we see content as a service. So it's, how are you wearing that sweater? Okay, why should I buy it? Why is it different? Let's look at, and styling is such a big part of what we do. And I think, a real differentiator just in terms of, it's our point of view. I mean, you may or may not like it, but there's a distinct way in which we go about really putting looks together. And we really like to take our customer by the hand and say, okay, this is how we would recommend doing this, that, and the other thing. And I think then it comes down to the customer too. So in terms of brands, they know we have a customer who is an early adopter, loves fashion, loves newness. And as an early adopter, I think it gives you a good read of what trends have, pardon the pun, but runway, and which may not. And knowing that this woman or man is coming in early and picking up on stuff, how quickly will they stay with it? How quickly will they come out of it? What has resonance? And we also sell, and this may be surprising to people that don't know our business, but we sell, ready-to-wear is our biggest category. And I think it's often just assumed that, okay, you're online, you're selling only shoes and bags. But actually we sell ready-to-wear, and we sell very fashion-forward ready-to-wear. So runway works incredibly well for us. And we hear from brands often that we will sell pieces that they are sometimes hesitant to even buy for their own stores because they wonder actually if they've got the customer for it. So again, it's a differentiator.
Why is it important to keep investing in that storytelling element, and instead of just kind of pure product strategy?
I think they're intertwined. I mean, I think that and for us, content is a pretty broad-reaching umbrella, if you will, because there's content, the styling that we do on the site is content, right? It's not all editorial. The styling that we do, the how-to, the wear it with, even the way in which we go about describing the product and offering fit notes. And I think, if we look at Net-a-Porter specifically, and I mean, I could speak about Mr. Porter, I can speak about the Yoox and the Outnet for sure. But I think if we look at Net-a-Porter, because being the first in this content and e-com universe of ours, it's really, we believe really strongly in the empowering nature of fashion and just how it can make you feel. I think in terms of content, I'll go back to what I said a moment ago about it really being a service and a way in which to bring the product to life. And I think also showcasing fashion on people that you're interested in, that have a story to tell. So I'm speaking, I'm looking at you, you're wearing a dress, it's so great. Why, who are you? Okay, you're an architect, that's amazing. How does that represent your style? What does your style say about you? Where do you travel to? And it's that curiosity, and it's this combination of curiosity and style and interest. And I think it's engagement. And what we found is that, Net-a-Porter is, we're a retailer, we're an e-tailer, we're also a brand, and we're representative of this amazing community of customers all over the world.
Speaking of community
Yeah.
sharing, I know that events and hosting is a big part of what you do. I've come to some very fun Net-a-Porter events over the years. And
Thank you.
of course. And I wanted to also, as a digital first business, ask you, what is the importance of bringing, whether it's the fashion community or your customers, bringing them together in real life, and you hosting and having those conversations in person and adding that element to the business instead of kind of focusing on purely the digital aspect?
It's a really wonderful way in which to engage with your brands, engage with your community, and also get to know your customer as well. And I think, listen, our primary focus is online. E-commerce is the core of what we do. But I think there's, listen, if we're talking about customer activations, our most engaged customers, we call our EIPs, for extremely important people. And it's really our way of saying thank you and getting to know you better. How can we get to know you better? How can we fulfill your needs? And those events take on different guises. So it could be, we're going to invite you to preview a collection or to look at these very special pieces. Come to a dinner, meet a designer. It's a way of getting to know the customer and also therefore giving back. But it's also understanding that, I think it's very simplistic to say you're an online shopper or you're an offline shopper. We know, multi-channel people have talked about till they're blue in the face, but we know that the customer is shopping and experiencing things in lots of different ways. And so for us, yes, we're primarily online, but also coming to you in your community and meeting you face to face is incredibly important. And also when it comes to collections and brands and bringing these initiatives to life, it's a great way of doing it. And it's also, frankly, can be a really terrific way of generating content because, okay, perhaps you weren't there. You weren't able to be with us. We did a really great activation with Cucinelli in Aspen at the beginning of the year, but around a capsule. So it's one, the celebration, it's bringing in members of our community, EIPs, but then also this beautiful content that's created around this, which is then bringing the product to life.
Let's talk a bit more about the EIPs as well. It's quite a selfish question because when, as you know, I used to work for you at Net-a-Porter, it was the one department that I was so curious by that very shiny, beautiful world and then your team of personal shoppers. They are driving a big portion of your business, right? And as now we are kind of facing challenging economic situations as well, the kind of general consensus is that those are the customers that are really driving businesses that are still shopping, even though consumer behavior is changing across the board. Is that what you found at the Net-a-Porter Group? And how have you been working on nurturing those relationships?
It's funny because we started the podcast with me saying it was a full circle moment for me, but arguably this is also a full circle moment for you.
Absolutely, for me as well.
It's a sort of virtual homecoming.
Yeah.
Listen, I think our EIPs have really been a very, very strong area of the service surrounding EIPs. The EIP proposition has been a core focus for us since the inception of the business. I always say everything we do is for our EIP. And it's not to suggest for a second that if you're not an EIP that we don't care. Of course we do. But my feeling is if you actually pitch your service and everything you do at your most engaged customer, everyone else benefits. So I think it's really a continuation of what we set out to do at the very beginning. I'd say that a change is that, historically it was what I would describe as a sort of stealth program. You were an EIP once you got sort of the tap on the shoulder that said, oh, by the way, you're an EIP. But prior to that, you didn't necessarily know it existed. We've started to softly, just because what we started to hear from customers was, well, hold on a second. I have a friend who has the following benefits, because when you become an EIP, you get early access to products. You can see things 36 hours in advance. There's product that we actually only make available to our EIPs. There's that piece around events that we talked about, but also you're assigned a personal shopper. So there's all sorts of wonderful benefits. And we were starting to hear from people say, well, hang on, how can I experience that? So we've lifted the veil, so to speak, somewhat on that. And I think what you say when you read reports and things coming from luxury players, for sure, it's these most loyal customers. What you're hearing is that that's where the traction. For us, though, it's not a new area of focus. It's really zeroing in on what we've been doing since the beginning.
Absolutely. And I guess these are also the people that are early adopters. They will buy the special runway pieces, and that's where you can have quite a lot of fun with the products that you offer and with the buys.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd say the early adopter quality is really, we see it across all of our customer segments. Again, I mean, it's a generalization. I wouldn't say every single customer is an early adopter, but I think the Net-a-Porter, focusing on women's, the Net-a-Porter customer is definitely a sort of an avid fashion consumer, very, very curious about trends, very happy to try new things, wants to be first. I think that is the kind of a customer segment agnostic trait. But yes, we see that concentrated massively within our EIP community. I think with the evolution of the calendar, it feels like they're buying all year long, or that there's something to see all year long. And then it's also not just limited to markets, but it's also you're discovering brands in all sorts of new and interesting ways, which maybe we'll come on to in a little bit. I think in terms of discovery, there's a few questions. I think one, is this collection doing something different? How is it setting itself apart from everything else that's happening in the market? In terms of the product itself, in terms of the fabrication, in terms of the styling, in terms of the price point, the storytelling around it, right? Are they doing something different? And is that going to resonate with the customer? So then the first answer in that case, okay, yes. Then it comes down to really operational issues too, like can they produce? And knowing what our minimums will look like, is that going to be okay? Is that going to be too daunting a proposition for them? So there's really a whole set of criteria that my teams are, the teams are really, really well versed in assessing. And what is super exciting is actually that first season when these brands come onto the site, because we want our customer to feel that we are an incredibly, one of the things we don't take for granted for a second is the trust our customers have in us. Okay, if this is a brand that has appeared on Net-a-Porter, we know it's here for a reason, and it's super exciting. We know we're going to be first. It's going to really be phenomenal. What we started really doing since the early-ish days was helping our brands, both new and in some cases a little more established, but more sort of nascent brands, just in really honing in on expertise in areas that perhaps they didn't necessarily have within their teams. So whether that be help from a digital marketing perspective, or help on the merchandising side, or help in understanding, okay, how do we penetrate the APAC market? And we were doing this really as a matter of course. It wasn't super systematized. And what we realized is actually we needed to create perhaps a more sort of level playing field in terms of, okay, how do I, as a brand or potential brand, tap into that? So I think it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we launched the Vanguard, which is our established program for smaller brands coming on board. There's a set of criteria really clearly defined that they need to fulfill. And then once you become a part of the Vanguard, we commit to, one, picking up your collection, but two, a number of opportunities/services that you can participate in. And that can be mentoring. It could be also, let's call it boot camp in terms of specific areas, sessions with different departments. And that's proven really, really successful.
And this is more to do with your industry experience and the conversations that you have with these young designers. Do you find that there's still a pool of talent willing to take the risk to launch their own brands, and the market does give them the opportunity to keep growing and to thrive given the challenges, given that the big luxury groups are dominating the game? What are you seeing from those young designers, and what's the overall mood at the moment?
It's not easy. It's never been easy. What we're seeing, I think now, is there's no shortage of designers and brands coming to market. I think the way in which it's happening is different, which is why there's been so much buzz around D2C. I think also, there was probably a moment in time where the dream was, oh my gosh, I'm going to have my brand and then I'm going to be part of a big group. And there's probably lots of brands who still feel that way, but increasingly there are more, I think, sort of independent players, and the way of doing business has changed. And also I look at the way, coming back to a point we just sort of touched on briefly before around discovery. I think that there's been an enormous amount of learning industry-wide, and I think, across brands. I think players coming into the market now are really benefiting from both the sort of expertise and the highs, but also the lows that have been experienced by some of their more established colleagues.
Are there things you would like the industry to do better in terms of, and speaking from a macro perspective, in terms of supporting these brands? You mentioned that your team is on the road all year round, buying collections, the pace that we all have to operate in. What are some changes if you were kind of head of the industry at large, that and you could wave your magic wand? What are some changes that you would like to see?
Can you imagine if there was a job head of industry at large? Maybe that's a great...
I mean, I would trust you with it. I'm sure you could do a great job.
You're very kind. You're really kind. Not sure about that, but right. I would say, listen, I think, there's been a lot said already about the pressure put on designers for the number of collections they're needing to produce. I think volume of product, that probably comes under the sort of headline of volume of product. So understanding what's really necessary in terms of numbers of collections produced during the year. Again, buy now, wear now. I think if we could sort that out, if we could sort out the cycle, it would solve really, I think, quite a number of problems. And I think also, inventory management. I think, one of the things that both brands and retailers have suffered from is really this excess stock, excess inventory. Produce, sell. And if it doesn't sell, it's going into markdown. And they're just, again, the pressure from a P&L perspective on all of these brands, it's immense. So I would just say, this focus, and again, in a way, it comes back to, coming back to the buy now, wear now, it comes back to the consumer. What are they looking for right now? And again, this has been talked about endlessly, but why can't you buy coats when it's cold, right? Or why are we selling coats when it's hot? So I think those would go a bit of a way. But I think it comes down to also, I think, really investing in the longevity of creative talent careers. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of volatility in the market recently. And I think understanding how long does it really take for a designer to find their feet? It's not a season. It's not 2 seasons. And really, I think the other thing is that, and again, this isn't a perfect world, but I think we've seen across brands the incredible impact of that yin yang between a CEO and a creative director who are symbiotic. So I guess if I could wave my magic wand, those are a few of the things I would ask for. I mean, there'd be sort of a host more. But again, I think that could really make an impact if it were available to everybody.
No, these are very important points. And I think there have been discussions, especially over the pandemic, that there is a willingness from a lot of different stakeholders. Still, nothing has really come to fruition yet. Have you been able, of course, you have to engage with the system, but have you been able to instigate some changes within the business since those discussions happened, since the pandemic, that changed the way you do things?
I think we're very careful, yes, we're quote unquote buying all the time, but we're also really careful in terms of the volumes that we're buying. We believe really strongly in also selling things at full price. So selling them, we're not in this, we're a full price luxury retail business. I speak now for full price luxury retail side of my business, because we also have a discount side. I would say that we also, what is paramount to us is really supporting the brands and the designers that we work with. I mean, there were more than a handful, who had a very tough time for the better part of 4 and change years ago. And we really were at pains to stick by them and do whatever we could to keep them going. And that's really important to us. And the great news is the bulk of them have emerged flying. They've got sort of in butterfly mode, and I think, which is wonderful to see. I think also, one of the things that's evolved, you asked me before what's evolved in terms of the business. I think there is increasingly a values-driven customer, right, who is looking for, they're coming to us looking for fashion, they're coming looking for beautiful product, but they also really want to understand the brands they're buying into and what is their impact from an environmental perspective, what are the values behind these brands. And it's for that reason also that we created Net Sustain. And this idea that, yes, we always worked with brands that said they were sustainable. And one of the things, I was very conscious of the whole greenwashing phenomenon. I was also very conscious of, I think, the inconsistencies within, okay, what does it mean to be a sustainable brand? And also consumer awareness, right? And I wanted to make sure that if we actually said, okay, we're bringing to market a sustainable offer, that it was really watertight. So we developed, we had some wonderful outside support from some experts and developed these sort of commandments, if you will, just around what it is to truly be a sustainable business. And we use that to vet both new brands coming into the space who were sort of waving a sustainability flag, but equally brands who wanted to incorporate that into part of their offer as well, which has been really, it's been very well received and very impactful.
We've spoken about the business at large, but like you mentioned earlier, you do oversee both Net-a-Porter, Mr. Porter, the Outnet, Yoox. There's all these different strands to the group now. And I'd be really interested, especially looking at the full price offering, about the main difference between your women's and menswear businesses and how similar, how different they are, how are customers behaving differently, if those values that you were mentioning just earlier work differently across the two businesses.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story from the very early days of when we launched Mr. Porter. The brand had just launched and we were talking to a would-be customer. And I think we had around 80 brands or so when we started, just less. And this would-be customer said, "You guys don't have anything." And we said, "Oh gosh, sorry, you fell. Can you drill a little deeper?" And he was like, "You don't have blah, blah." And it was some brand that he wore. And it was sort of a light bulb moment, because we're like, oh my gosh, because we don't have brand blah, blah, we therefore had nothing. And then we went further and we're like, he actually was shopping. He was looking for what he already had. So in the early days, one of the things that sort of became clear is that he was looking for what he already had. So I wear blue shirts, where are the blue shirts? Whereas our woman, or our Net-a-Porter customer, I should say, was looking for things that they didn't have at all. Show me the new, show me something I've never seen. What do I not have? As opposed to, so it's like shopping for the hole in your closet rather than shopping to introduce other blue shirt friends to your blue shirts. Again, big generalization. But I think, and again, we've got a really early adopter on Mr. Porter. And of course, we'll have a repeat customer on Net-a-Porter who wants to buy what they already have. But I think behaviorally, what's new and the appetite for new is greater on the women's side. An appreciation of content is shared across the two. I think Mr. Porter was earlier in the sort of lifestyle space, whether through gifting or home. We sort of jumped on that bandwagon earlier on because it really felt very much a part of this Mr. Porter world.
And I guess even if there isn't the same amount of appetite for the new, there is still a lot of potential for that business to continue to grow through other categories, through the repeat customer and loyalty that
Absolutely.
You nurture, right?
Absolutely. And by new, listen, he wants to see, I should qualify that, because he absolutely wants to see new product. It's just the sort of, I guess, the early adoption of trend. Also, it's the women's wear is probably much more of a trend-based business, whereas, as I said, on Mr. Porter, it's probably, I wouldn't say classic because that's not the right word, but I think it's just more centered around style.
And I mean, we've been speaking about evolution, whether it's the customer, the business, your own role within the business, quite a lot. I'd love to bring it to the present moment and look a little bit into the future as well. Do you have specific goals, aspirations about the business? It is a very changed landscape from COVID to everything that we've seen at the moment. What are you most looking forward to? What are you working towards now?
Really continuing to focus, I know I keep using that word, to focus on what we do best. I think service, curation. When I describe our businesses, I say that we've done the heavy lifting for you. We've gone out, we've looked at every brand, we've been in every showroom, we've done everything, and we have selected the things that we deem to be really the most relevant for our customer and the best that's out there. So you don't have to do that. Really focusing on this curation, using content to bring it life, continuing to do what we do, to serve our EIPs, to do what we do, but do it even better. And by better, it's from a localization standpoint, making sure that we're speaking to you in your language, literally and figuratively, using delivery methods that are most relevant to you, payment methods, etc. Personalization, again, it's a hot topic, I think, but really making sure that we are showing you the things that are most relevant to you, and it's in no way shortchanging your experience, but making sure you can find the things you want to the fastest. We can help you discover things in the quickest way possible. I think continuing for us as a business to continue to give back to the communities that we serve is really incredibly important. And by that, I'm not talking about localization or serving the customer, but also saying, okay, if New York is a very big market for us, what are we doing from a charitable perspective to help really give back to that market?
And more from, again, a more macro industry perspective, there have been all these conversations. You mentioned kind of the boom of D2C. When you were starting at Net-a-Porter, we've seen e-commerce first, a lot of doubters, then a big boom. Now we're also talking about the return to stores. How do you see it? Now, I mean, it's second nature for us to shop online at this point, but how do you see it evolving and also standing side to side to the physical shopping and to the more traditional stores?
I think they'll continue to coexist beautifully. I think I've yet to meet any shopper who only will shop. I mean, even when people say I only shop online, they're buying things in stores as well. They may not be buying the same things in stores that they're buying online. And ditto, I don't think I've come across anyone who's never bought anything online. Although I'd be curious too, because I would like to understand more about that. And so I think that they will continue to exist. I just think you need to, as a business, and I think coming back to your point around what is the state of play now? You need to have a reason for being. Why are people going to come to you? What do you do that's different? And how are you going to make me as a customer, how are you going to make my life? What are you doing for me that something else isn't doing for me? But it doesn't mean, I think I couldn't agree with you more on the sort of perhaps the disruptive nature of sensationalist headlines, because people will shop in stores and that's wonderful. But again, as a store, why am I going to the store? What's my value add there? And customers will shop online. And perhaps there'll be fewer players, and we're seeing quite a lot of consolidation in the market, but the two will continue to exist side by side.
That's it from this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Gunnar Gronlid and edited by Jack Jewers and Flynn Simmons. From me, Natalie Theodosi, thanks very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.